Good evening. What a blessing to be with you this evening. You know, Sunday nights, I just like to exist in the now. You ever want to do that? Just forget about tomorrow because the week's going to start. That's what I hate about getting done with church on Sunday night. I know Monday's coming, and forget about everything else and just live in the minute, in the moment. I think as people, we struggle with that, and I'm trying to be better at that, to live in the moment, to be thankful for the people that are beside you, the people in your lives, to be thankful for the good things, and just to live in that sometimes, and just to feel blessed in that. We don't do that as people like we should. Isn't that what Jesus tells us? He says, sufficient for today is the evil thereof. Doesn't he say that? He says, don't worry about tomorrow, right? Because tomorrow is not ours. Doesn't belong to me and you. But this minute, this second, this moment, it's ours. And I don't know, that's just a thought. I've been trying to live my life more that way lately, to back off from things a little bit and to try to enjoy my minutes and my days and my people and try not to worry so much about everything else. Because, in the end of it, it just isn't important, is it? It's just not important. Anyway, this is a story of the Bible that has always intrigued me. And over the years, my thoughts about this miracle have changed a lot. I guess from what I was when I was a kid, when I was a teenager reading this story, and as I've grown in the last few years, I read this story, I really see the depth of this miracle. That's kind of a pun, pool and depth. Anyway, I really see the depth of this miracle. And really, there's so many questions I have that I know I can't answer in this, but they make me think about not only about this man, but about Jesus and about us and about how that he works and we work. It's a really fascinating story. It's a story of a man who is lame. And I'm going to read you this text. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porticos. In these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered, waiting for the moving of the waters. Now in the Greek, this is kind of a parenthetical statement, even though there are no parentheses in Greek. For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after the stirring up of the water, stepped in was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted. A man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been a long time in that condition, he said to him, "Do you wish to get well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming, another steps down before me." And Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your pallet, and walk." Of all the miracles in the Bible, maybe this one fascinates me the most. I mean, maybe it's not the grandest miracle. Maybe it's not the greatest healing. I don't know. It seems like they're all pretty great to me. I don't know how you put a number on it. But the fascinating thing about this is that there's a lot of people here, right? The text says that there's a multitude of people, right? In these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered. Jesus healed a lot of blind people, right? And nobody ever healed the blind until the New Testament, until Jesus. Jesus healed a lot of people who were sick. What was it about this man? This man that had been there. A lot of people Jesus healed had been that way their whole life, right? Like the man that was born blind from birth. They had been, their whole life had been sick or blind or lame. What was the significance of this man that had been ill for 38 years, do you think? I think there's a lot to this. You know, for one thing, a person who's been some way their whole life, they really don't know what it's like not to be that way. I mean, that's just the reality. You know, try to tell a blind man what a sunset looks like, or a sunrise, or what it looks like to look down into water, or to see a child's face. You can't do it. I mean, let's face it. You can make all kinds of illustrations, but somebody that's never saw the color blue or the orange or never saw a light shine through a cloud, how can you explain to them the beauty of a sunrise or a sunset? What's your comparison? What can you possibly say to make that blind person truly see what you see with your eyes? And the answer is, you can't do that. It's impossible. What about someone who's lost their vision? I can explain that to them, right? I can explain to them what it looks like because there's a comparison. This man, he knew what it was like to be well. And I think that's important in this story. You know, we all don't start out sick in life. We all don't start out lame. We all don't start out broken. We all start out okay, right? Most of us. I mean, I realize there's people come out of a bad childhood. Let's not overanalyze it. But most of us start out okay. But somewhere along the line, something happens to us, right? Isn't that right? We get broken along the road. And sometimes we never get fixed. Sometimes we just stay broke our whole lives. And sometimes we're okay with that. Some people, they like to be broken. Would you agree with that? There's people who like to be broken. I know people like that. They really like to be broken because it's become their life. It's become their pattern. When I see them, the first thing they tell me is how bad it is and how all this stuff's happened. And it's the focus of their life. It's become their life. Their brokenness has become their identity, who they are, what they're about. You know, this man had been broken a long time. 38 years he'd sat by this pool. 38 years his sustenance had probably been begging on the street, begging for someone to put money into this camp. But this man had been well, right? This man, at some point in this man's life, he had been whole. And so Jesus asked him this really big question that Jesus doesn't really ask people. He asked him, he says, do you want to get well? And I think that's such a fascinating question because for me and you, it'd be like, oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I want to walk. But you know, maybe that guy didn't really like to work. You know what I mean? Maybe he had become comfortable in making money from other people and not having to really put forth the effort. Maybe he had become comfortable in his life, in the brokenness that he was, in the place that he was. You know, when Jesus said, I'm going to heal you, I'm going to put your legs back, I'm going to give you the ability to walk, what was Jesus saying? He said, I'm going to change your life. You're not going to be able to lay at this pool every day, day after day, and beg for these alms and rely on the kindness of strangers. You're not going to be able to do that anymore because now you're not going to have an excuse not to get up and work and get up and have your life and get up and do those things you want to do. And so Jesus asked him this really powerful question. He says, do you really want to be better? And there's a lot of people that are broken in the world that if they're really honest with you and you really ask them and you says, do you really want to be better than you are? They would say, no, I'm okay where I'm at. Because the truth is that whenever we change requires effort. Change requires all those things we don't like. We don't like change for the most part, do we? And when we come up to that thing, that's what Jesus was saying. Do you really want to be different? Do you really want to be well? Do you really know what that means? Do you know it's going to change your life? Do you know it's going to change who you have to be? Do you understand? Do you want to be well? And I love the man's response. Because the man's response wasn't, oh yes, I want to be healed. The man's response was, well, there's nobody to get me to the water. You see? Now that kind of sounds a little bit like an excuse, doesn't it? I mean, couldn't he have maybe got somebody to take him? Couldn't he have sat a little closer maybe? Got a little closer to the pool so he could have just rolled off in there when the water moved? Or, you know what I'm saying? But he said, but his reason, he didn't answer the question. Do you want to get well? Well, you see, there's just no one to take me down there. And I think that answer, it intrigues me about what's really going on in that man's mind. You know, in Acts 2, when Peter preaches a sermon and he convicts them of this great sin, and you've crucified the Savior, the Son of God, and you've hung him on a cross, and you're the ones who did it. It's your fault. And sometimes we miss that in Acts 2. You know, that was what Peter was telling them. He says, you have crucified the Son of God. I mean, that was their transgression. That was their sin. Peter didn't stand up and say, you're all great sinners and you all need to come to God and, you know, you need to get all these sins wiped out of your life. Peter stood up and he said, this is what you did. You crucified the Son of God. And you're guilty. It was specific. And those people, in Acts 2, it says, those people were pierced to the heart and said, what shall we do? You know, so many times when we have a problem and people come to Christ and there's things in their life, it's because there's a problem, something, one thing. A lot of times it's one thing. Either relationships falling apart, health's falling apart, grief, depression, loneliness, sorrow. Those things bring people to the Lord. Because when you get to that point in your life and you feel lost and that big thing happens and you think, you know, I need to get well and nothing's working. So I'm going to come to the Lord. You know, I'm going to come to Christ. I'm going to come to God. I've tried all these other things. I've got this thing in my life and it's specific. And the problem with that is sometimes when that goes away, when that thing, that whatever that was, that one thing goes away, then they fall away because they really didn't want to get well. They wanted to get fixed. Does that make any sense? You know, there's a difference between getting fixed and getting well. Big difference. You know, sometimes people don't really want to be well. They just want to be fixed. You know, it's like when somebody brings a vehicle into the shop and they're like, I just really don't care if you fix it. Just get it where we'll get it down the road, right? I just want you to fix it where it'll run. You know, I don't want it to be well. I don't want it to be right. Just make it work. And many times in our lives, that's how we are. We're like, I don't really care if I'm hitting on all 8 cylinders, right? 4 will get me down the road. Just get me, you know, just get me good enough I can go. I can function. I can get through my day, get through my night, and get through the next day. You know, I just want to be functional. I don't really want to be fixed. I just want to be functional. And I think sometimes with Christ, that's how it is. And yet, Jesus was telling this guy, there's more to this healing, more to me fixing you, these legs and making you walk again. There's more to that than just, I want to know if you really want to be well. Do you really want to be a whole person? Do you really want to be complete? Do you really want to change your life? Do you really want to be different? And I think when Jesus saw, he picked that guy out for a reason. I mean, there's a multitude of sick people that all there probably would like to have got healed. And Jesus didn't walk up to that 5 porches, 5 porticos, it says. He didn't walk up to those 5 porches and that multitude of people and raise his hands and said, everybody leave, you're all fixed. He could have, couldn't he? He could have walked up there and held up his hands or just stood there and said, you guys are well, everybody go home. But he didn't. He picked that one guy, and he let that guy make a decision on whether or not he healed him. And I can't help but let that fascinate me. Jesus could see the heart of men. We can't see that. Jesus knew the heart of this guy. There's a reason Jesus picked this guy. There's a reason. And I think when we look at this, it's this thing about coming into the presence of Christ. Jesus was different. He was powerful, and he had the ability to do this thing. And that would be petrifying. You know, we don't ever think of, the Bible never really gives us the narrative of the person that was healed very often. I mean, we get little pieces here and there. But the Bible doesn't really give us this guy's story. I mean, I kind of wish it did. Because what would that guy think? What would he feel? What went through his head? I mean, how did it happen? I mean, how was he lame? I don't know. But when Jesus walked up there and he says, take up your bed and walk. And the guy for 38 years has laid in this bed. And the guy gets up and picks up his bed that he's been laying on and walks off. And we just read that like it's not anything. But I can't imagine. I mean, I just had a minor surgery. Wasn't a big thing, really, I mean, pretty minor surgery. But I mean, if Jesus had walked in before that surgery, when I was laying there, before I went into surgery, he said, I already took care of it, Rex, get up and go home. That would work on me a little. I mean, it would. I mean, I'd be in awe of that, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd be like, golly, can you believe that? I didn't have to do anything. I'm all fixed. I'm good. I don't have to go back. No follow-up appointment. It's all good. I'm done. This guy picks up his bed. And I think when Jesus does that, I just can't help but believe that it's somewhere on them, it scares them to death. That God himself, God Almighty, would look upon you and say, I'm going to heal you. And when that would happen, what would you think? Be honest. First thing in your head. First thing in your head. Just be honest with me. Be the man. Be that man laying there. And Jesus walks up and he says, take up your bed and walk. And for 38 years you couldn't do that. And you stand up and you pick up your bed. And what's the first thing that comes into your mind? What do you want from me? Wouldn't you think? What do you want from me? Because nobody does anything for nothing, right? And the first thing I would think of, if Jesus walked into my hospital bed before my little minor surgery and said, oh, it's all done, Rex, just go home and everything's good and go back to work, everything's fine. You know what I would think? What do you want from me, Lord? Why are you doing this to me? Because now I'm indebted. Now I feel like I need to do something to repay you for what you've done. What do you want? And I think that's what happened in Luke 5 when Jesus was calling Peter, and Peter was in the boat, and all the fish came into the boat. And it was this miraculous catch of fish, and Peter was there, and the fish was all around him. And when Peter saw that, the most magnificent day of Peter's life, he won the lottery. The fish were around his feet. He was going to go home. He was going to buy the wife a new refrigerator. It was going to be great. But Peter couldn't think about any of that because all Peter could do was look at Jesus and say, what on earth do you want from me? I mean, maybe you don't read the text that way, but Peter said, leave me alone. Whatever you want, it's too much. Right? I mean, that's how I see it. I mean, you might see it different. I'm not saying I see it right. I'm just saying that's how I would be if I was Peter. Because when Peter drew them fish in and was standing in that midst of that bounty and that harvest, the first thing Peter thought was the first thing I would think. What do you want from me? And am I willing to give it? Maybe that's not how Peter thought, but that's how I would think. And Peter said, please, Lord, leave me alone because I don't want to change. Some of us were just in it for the short game, right? So many people have walked in and out of these doors, even in the time that I've been a preacher here. Sincere, broken, tearful. Come in here for a while, month, week, 2 or 3 years. Get better. One day, they quit. Sometimes you go to the people and are like, well, things are pretty good now. Those things that drove me to the Lord, that drove me to Jesus, I'm pretty good. They just wanted it fixed, you see. They didn't want to be made well. In John 6, Jesus challenged them, and they left. Jesus accused them. He says, you're only here because you ate the loaves and were filled. You're not here because of who I am or what I have to offer. You're only in it for the short game, you see. And so many times in faith and Christianity, that's how we are. Sometimes people are raised in the church, like our children, raised in the church. And then they run off and go to college and the world, and and sometimes they fall away and they quit coming and they quit going and they get off into the things the world has. And I've seen it a lot of times in my life, and then one day something happens. And we see them again, and they come back. And they think they want to be back because their life didn't go like they wanted it. Their life didn't turn out, and bad things happen. And sometimes they come back and they stay, and sometimes they come back until whatever it was that drove them back is fixed, and then we don't ever see them again. You see, there's a short game with God, and there's a long game. Just as sure as in John 6:66 the people departed, in John 6:68 Peter says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. Peter, the same one who said, Lord, depart from me, for I'm a sinful man, is the same one who at this point says, you're the way. Peter understood that was his life. That was who he was going to be, what he was going to be, what he was going to be about, that he had truly given his life, truly devoted himself to Christ. Peter was in it for the long game, for the whole deal, not just for the little bit. You and I as Christians, we have to ask ourselves, what do we want out of this? Do you want to be fixed? Do you want to be well? Do you want to put in the work? Do you want to change? Do you want to stay how you are? There's so many questions, isn't there? Because when Jesus Christ walks up to you and looks down at you and says, do you want to be well? You really need to think about what that means to you, to me. Do I want to change my life, my habits, my attitude, my friends? Do I want to change my lifestyle? Do I want to really change? Am I really in it? Or am I scared? Maybe I want to just be me and kind of put God in a little bit, right? And I want to kind of be me in charge and God my sidekick person, right? And just have him kind of help me when I need him a little bit and not really give myself to him. In John 5, a little bit further in the text, he says, but the man who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had slipped away while there was a crowd in that place. And that really gives us an idea how many people were here. And afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said, behold, you have become well. Don't go back to who you were. When Jesus stepped into his life, Jesus said, you need to change. Because your body, maybe you thought your body was your problem. Maybe you thought that outside problem was your problem. But Jesus says the problem is always inside, isn't it? To be well inside, to be whole inside. This body is frail at best, isn't it? This body is frail. This life is fleeting. This time is passing. Paul in 2 Timothy says that I'm already being poured out. 2 Timothy, Paul's going to lose his head. It's coming in a few days. This is close to the end. 2 Timothy, last letter Paul wrote. Paul's in a dungeon in Rome, chained to the wall. This isn't like the first time. Paul's cold, Paul's lonely, Paul's hungry, Paul's going to die. And Paul writes to Timothy, and he says, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. The time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. In the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord the righteous judge will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all those who have loved his appearing. You know, Paul laid in a dungeon in Rome, and Paul said, the body's gone. I've been beaten. I've been flogged. They've tried to kill me. I've been stoned. I've been cold. I've been hungry. I've been lonely. My body's gone. But my soul is well. You know, at the end of our life, I hope that's what we say. You know, I hope I use this body up. I intend to. I intend to use this body up all the way, as far as I can use it up. But at the end of it, I hope when I can say, yeah, this body's gone, and this body's unfit, and this body is not going to last much longer, I hope that I can say my soul is well. And there's laid up for me a crown in heaven. Not just for me, but for all those who got into Christ for the long game and not the short game. Do you want to really be well? Do you want to really change? Do you want to be who Jesus really wants you to be? It's a hard question, isn't it? And I hope your answer is yes. Pick up your bed and walk. I hope. Thanks for your time. If we can help you in any way, won't you let it be known?